For those of you who just joined or haven't watched the earlier chapters, you can click the button in the top right corner of this screen. Welcome and enjoy the storyline on this channel. A few moments later, the story shifts to another place, while the blue moon eclipse is still happening and hasn't completely ended yet. Inside a room that looked more like a prison than a palace, Grit stood holding a drink. From behind the window, he gazed at the night sky and watched the blue moon eclipse slowly approaching its end. While sipping the red wine in his hand, Grit felt relieved. The Red Ribbon Kingdom did not experience any effects from the phenomenon. In his mind, all of that happened thanks to the protective mana that had kept the kingdom safe from outside influences. However, for Grit, the end of the eclipse did not mean his work was finished. On the contrary, there was still an important matter that had to be resolved before the night was over. In the corner of the room, a pair of hands could be seen tightly handcuffed. That figure was still standing under strict supervision. In a forceful tone, Grit reminded that he was still waiting for the answer that had to be given before the blue moon eclipse truly ended. Slowly, he turned around and called out Zerat's name, the young master from the Secret Inspection Bureau who was now his prisoner. Grit judged that Zerat's father seemed not to care much about his son's fate. However, instead of showing fear, Zerat actually stood with a thin, meaningful smile. His gaze remained calm as he looked at Grit. Behind that expression, there was an unshakable confidence. Zerat believed that the plan Grit was carrying out would not go as he wanted. Meanwhile, in front of the castle gate, two guards were still on duty in the quiet of the night. One of them even yawned widely, trying to fight off the drowsiness that was slowly taking over him. At that time, one of the guards mentioned that in recent years, the Red Ribbon Kingdom had hardly ever caused any trouble. The ongoing stability made him feel grateful for Grit's hard work all this time. In the midst of such a safe situation, he even began to question why he still had to stand guard that night. The fellow guard beside him slowly closed his eyes. The growing drowsiness made him wish he could rest for a moment. But right at that moment, someone seemed willing to grant that wish. That figure turned out to be Iona. With a magic staff in her hand, a soft pink aura began to radiate and spread all around. In an instant, her sleep magic enveloped the guards' bodies. The eyelids of one of the guards slowly closed, until finally his body collapsed helplessly to the ground, seeing his comrade fall just like that. The guard who was still conscious immediately went on alert and shouted, demanding to know who had attacked them. But without realizing it, a shadowy figure had quickly moved behind him. LK darted forward at high speed and without hesitation landed a powerful punch that left the guard unable to put up any resistance at all. Within seconds, both guards were subdued. After making sure the situation was under control, LK signaled to the others that the path was clear. From behind the bushes, Pew, the Black Rabbit, Theo, and the other members quickly emerged from their hiding spots. Theo approached Iona with an expression of admiration. He was truly impressed by the effectiveness of the magic that had just been used. Meanwhile, Pew told the Black Rabbit that it was very likely Zerat was being held as a prisoner in the palace dungeon. On the other hand, the Black Wolf reminded them that the security conditions inside the palace were still unknown territory. According to him, that area was likely guarded much more strictly than the outer areas. Hearing that, Elka decided that they should continue the infiltration with greater caution. Before entering the palace, the Black Rabbit gripped his club tightly and declared his determination to protect Pew no matter what happened. Hearing that, Pew just blushed shyly before nodding his head slowly. Cautiously, Elka led the group down the quiet palace corridor. Iona, Theo, Pew, the Black Rabbit, and the others followed from behind, staying alert with every step. In the middle of the journey, Pew looked at the corridor covered in a thin layer of dust. The sight brought back memories of his childhood, but even though the place felt so familiar, he realized that the atmosphere had now changed. The warmth that once existed seemed to have disappeared, replaced by a cold and unfamiliar silence. Meanwhile, Theo felt a bad premonition that was hard to explain. The feeling of discomfort kept haunting his mind ever since they entered the palace. Realizing that Theo was starting to make himself heard, Iona immediately raised a finger in front of her lips, signaling him to stay quiet. Not long after, Elka began to sense that something was off. Considering that Grit dared to take Zerat, the son of the president of the Merchants Association, hostage, the palace security that seemed so lax felt very suspicious. Iona also agreed with that assessment. With Grit's reputation for being meticulous and calculating, it was impossible for him to leave such a huge security gap just like that. At the same time, the black rabbit's ears moved slowly, his eyebrows furrowed as he caught a faint sound coming closer from ahead. And sure enough, in an instant, Elka was startled when an arrow shot quickly toward him from the darkness of the corridor. Fortunately, the black rabbit's reflexes were much faster. With quick reflexes, he swung his club and deflected the arrow just before it hit Elka. Realizing there was an ambush, Iona immediately shouted loudly, demanding that whoever was hiding show themselves. Not long after, several figures, terrifying figures, began to emerge from the shadows. Horned skeletons appeared, gripping spears in their hands. The terrifying aura radiating from the creatures' bodies immediately made the corridor even more tense. Elka stared at them nervously and in shock. Her attention was drawn to the white dragon emblem engraved on those creatures. Meanwhile, Iona could only look on in confusion, as she had never seen creatures like that before. With an anxious tone, Elka explained that he had once read about the white dragon symbol in an ancient book. According to the records, those creatures were dragon-tooth warriors, a force created from dragon bones that were forged and resurrected as soldiers. Hearing that explanation, Black Rabbit immediately strengthened his resolve. With a serious look in his eyes, he prepared himself to break through the army of dragon-tooth warriors that now stood in their way to their main objective. However, Iona immediately tried to stop Black Rabbit. With a serious expression, she explained that the dragon-tooth warriors were not ordinary opponents. They are a force that knows no fatigue, is hard to destroy, and can keep fighting endlessly. Furthermore, Iona reminded them that the dragon-tooth warriors were made from dragon bones. Even the powerful magic that he had always relied on would most likely not be effective against them. Even so, there was one thing that kept weighing on his mind. He couldn't understand how Grit was able to obtain so many dragon bones to create such a large army. Hearing that explanation, Theo looked even more nervous. The number of dragon-tooth soldiers filling the corridor was so great that it made him wonder what steps they should take next. Without wasting any time, LK immediately made a decision. He asked all his companions to leave him to face the dragon-tooth soldiers alone, while the others had to immediately find Grit. Hearing that decision, Theo, Pew, Black Rabbit, and Iona immediately showed anxious expressions. Not long after, Theo expressed his objection to him. According to him, they should look for another way and keep moving together. For him, it was almost impossible for LK to face the entire army of dragon-tooth soldiers alone. However, LK just glanced back with a confident smile. He didn't seem afraid at all. At the same time, one of the dragon-tooth soldiers rushed forward and charged at him. Before the attack could reach its target, Black Wolf moved even faster. With incredible speed, he lunged forward and struck the dragon-tooth soldier with a powerful punch that stopped his attack in its tracks. Seeing that, LK told Theo that he wouldn't face the battle alone. After launching his attack, Black Wolf turned to LK. His gaze showed unshakable determination. As LK had long known, he would always stay by his side no matter what happened. Seeing the Black Wolf join the battle, the Black Rabbit also raised his weapon high. With great courage, he declared his desire to stay and fight alongside them. But suddenly, the Black Wolf threw the Black Rabbit far back. That small body fell to the floor before he could react. Moments after the Black Rabbit got up from his fall, the Black Wolf reminded him of one important thing. There is someone he has to protect, someone who needs him much more right now. And that person is none other than Princess Pew. Meanwhile, the dragon-tooth soldiers kept moving closer without stopping. Realizing the situation was getting more dangerous, Iona immediately called Pew and invited her to look for another route to continue their mission. With a serious tone, Iona expressed her concerns. The fact that Grit was able to control the dragon-tooth soldiers made her certain that the situation they were facing was far more dangerous than they had previously imagined. Therefore, the only viable option was to find Grit as soon as possible and stop him. Not long after, one of the wolves carried Theo, Iona, Pew, and the Black Rabbit away from the battlefield. Before parting, he said that they would entrust everything to Elka and the Black Wolf. while hoping that all the members of the group could return safely. As the battle was about to break out, Elka couldn't help but feel the irony of it. He once worked for Grit, someone he hated so much. Now, fate had brought him there, risking his life to stop his former master. In front of Elka and the Black Wolf, the Dragon-Tooth soldiers had formed a line and were ready to attack at any moment. However, the Black Wolf showed no fear at all. For him, there was no reason to talk about death before the battle was truly over. A moment later, attention shifted to a large door that tightly sealed a room inside the palace. The silence that enveloped the room was suddenly shattered by a powerful explosion. A loud bang shook the entire area, destroying the large door and sending it flying far away. Behind the billowing black smoke that filled the room, a figure appeared who had managed to break in. They were Elka, Theo, Pew, Black Rabbit, and Iona, now standing tall while loudly calling out Grit's name. On the other side of the room, Grit appeared to be sitting calmly behind his desk. Instead of being surprised, he looked composed, as if their arrival was just a minor, insignificant disturbance. With a cold gaze, Grit slowly turned his eyes toward the intruders standing before him. A moment later, his hand moved to reach for a staff that was not far from where he was sitting. At the same time, he lifted his black iron axe and slowly turned his body around. His demeanor showed displeasure at the way they entered the room, as if the breach of etiquette was more important than the threat now standing before him. But before Grit could do anything, an incredible wave of heat suddenly surged toward him. A burst of fierce flames instantly filled the room, mercilessly shooting toward Grit's position. The attack turned out to come from Iona's magic, unleashed through her magic staff. After launching that opening attack, she immediately checked their surroundings, trying to assess whether the situation was safe enough to move on to the next stage. Seeing the tremendous magic attack unleashed by Iona, Elka, Pew, Black Rabbit, and Theo were instantly shocked. Theo even thought that the battle might have ended with just that one attack. Hearing the praise, Iona still kept a serious expression. She gripped her magic staff tightly, which was still glowing, without letting her guard down at all. In the midst of that tension, Black Rabbit's ears twitched. Her instincts sensed something was speeding toward them. Sure enough, from behind the flames that hadn't completely died down, Grit was seen throwing his axe into the air. The weapon shot forward at a terrifying speed, heading straight for Pew and Iona, who stood at the front line. Without hesitation, Black Rabbit immediately leaped high into the air. With a powerful swing, he struck the axe using the hammer he brought with him. A loud crash echoed throughout the room, while Pew, who saw it, could only stare in shock and worry. Seeing that his axe was successfully blocked, Grit actually looked surprised. He looked at the group with a curious gaze, as if he didn't expect them to try so hard to stop him. With his magical power, the axe that had been knocked away floated back and landed in his hand. Not long after, Grit showed an annoyed expression. The aura radiating from his body slowly became more oppressive and intense, making the atmosphere in the room feel much heavier than before. On the other hand, Pew looked like he was starting to get scared. With his body slightly trembling, he realized that Grit was wearing protection made from dragon bones and was now surrounded by a power related to the dragon army. Iona, hearing that, immediately said she had known from the start they wouldn't be facing an opponent that was easy to defeat. Meanwhile, Grit questioned why he was accused of masterminding the kidnapping of Zerat, the Merchants Association president's son. In front of him, the Black Rabbit remained standing firmly at the front line with a hammer in hand. Behind him, Iona, Pew, Theo, and the White Wolf watched Grit's every move warily. Annoyance began to show clearly on Theo's face. In his opinion, Grit was not only trying to extort Mason, but had also done everything possible to gain benefits for himself. In Theo's view, a person should struggle and climb the tower through their own efforts, not by taking dishonest shortcuts. However, Grit seemed completely uninterested in such thoughts. With a thin, mocking smile, Grit admitted that he had anticipated everything from the very beginning. For him, a cunning fox like Mason would definitely send Iona to confront him. Even more than that, Grit knew that hatred toward him had grown in all their hearts. He was sure that sooner or later they would come looking for him themselves. While raising his axe, Grit actually looked grateful for their arrival. In his opinion, Having all his enemies in one place would only make his job easier to get rid of them all at once, even with his own hands. A moment later, Grit raised his axe high into the air and radiated a powerful killing intent. The threat emanating from him felt real, as if he truly intended to end everything that very night. However, instead of backing away in fear, the Black Rabbit stepped forward. With unwavering courage, he stood at the front line, ready to face Grit head-on. However, before the Black Rabbit could move any further, Pew suddenly appeared and tried to stop him. He realized that the situation they were facing was far more dangerous than it appeared. At the same time, Yona dashed forward while gripping her magic staff tightly. Without wasting any time, she immediately summoned a protective spell to block the next attack coming from Grit. The layer of magical defense formed in an instant, standing firm between them and the deadly axe that shot forward again. However, something unexpected happened. As soon as the protective spell appeared, Grit's axe pierced straight through it, just like that. The defense that should have been able to withstand such a strong attack seemed meaningless in the face of the axe's power. In a matter of seconds, Iona's magic shield was shattered to pieces. Seeing the danger coming so quickly, Theo immediately jumped toward Iona and pulled her away before the attack could hit her. On the other hand, Pew could only stare with wide eyes. He truly didn't expect that Yona's protective magic could be destroyed that easily. Even the White Wolf, who had always been calm, showed a surprised expression, because what happened was far beyond his expectations. With a serious tone, the White Wolf then revealed a fact that had been hidden all this time. A few years ago, the sacred relic belonging to the Silver Wolf tribe disappeared without a trace, and the weapon now in Grit's hands, that guillotine tier relic, turns out to be one of the 10 best weapons ever to exist in the Black Tower. The words of the White Wolf instantly made Yona shudder. With a slightly trembling voice, he questioned how Grit could have obtained such a valuable relic. However, Theo immediately diverted everyone's attention. For him, the origin of the item was not the most important thing to think about right now. With fiery determination, Theo emphasized that their only goal now was to bring Grit down, whatever it takes. Meanwhile, in front of them, Grit stood with full confidence. It was as if all the relics and extraordinary equipment he possessed had given him an unshakable sense of self-assurance. At the same time, the story shifted back to Sejun. After being unconscious for so long, he slowly opened his eyes. As his vision started to clear, the first figure he saw was Bat, who was staring at him with a surprised expression. With his body still feeling heavy, Sejun tried to get up and sit. Bat, who looked worried, immediately made sure that he was truly conscious. Meanwhile, Sejun, who was still confused, immediately asked what had actually happened. Bat then explained that during the blue moon eclipse, Sejun suddenly disappeared without a trace. However, after everything was over, Mama Bear and Garen managed to bring him back to the farm. Hearing that explanation, Sejun was immediately shocked. The first thing that crossed his mind was everyone's safety. Worried, he wanted to make sure that everyone made it through the eclipse safely. Unfortunately, Bat couldn't give a definite answer because he was outside the tower when the incident happened. That answer only made Sejun even more confused. He didn't understand what Bat meant when he said he was outside the tower. Before he could get an answer to his confusion, Bat suddenly ran off. He said that there was something he wanted to give in return. Sejun could only watch Bat leave, full of questions. He didn't understand what the little bat was doing. Not long after, Bat returned carrying an object that left Sejun stunned. In his hands was a bowl of ramen that still looked intact. With great enthusiasm, Bat explained that he managed to bring the food into the tower. With a hopeful tone, Bat wanted Sejun to like the gift he brought. However, what happened was beyond his expectations. Sejun froze in place, staring at the bowl of ramen with wide eyes. His voice even started to tremble. It had been so long since he had seen, let alone tasted, fast food from Earth. Without waiting any longer, Sejun immediately grabbed the bowl of ramen and hurriedly asked where Bat got it from. His emotional reaction actually made Bat scared. He thought he had made a mistake and immediately apologized. With eyes starting to well up with tears, Bat explained that he had flown around earlier and saw another human enjoying that ramen eagerly. That's why he thought Sejun might like it too. so he decided to bring it to him. Hearing that explanation, Sejun immediately held Bat's cheeks tightly with both hands. Then he lifted Bat high into the air, expressing his heartfelt gratitude. With emotions he could hardly hide, Sejun explained that the item he brought was a dish called ramen. While teasing a little, Sejun expressed his curiosity about how Bat managed to get out of the tower. He even imagined the possibility of going along with Bat. However, nervously, Bat explained that the ability was his own special skill, so bringing someone else along wasn't something easy to do. Even so, Sejun didn't mind. For him, the fact that Bat could bring food or other items from outside the tower was already something extraordinary. Hearing that, Bat looked relieved and explained that he could only bring items into the tower that he was still able to carry. That explanation gave Sejun a new understanding. He remembered that Skarum was the only person who had Bat. Because of that, now everything made sense. That was the reason why Skarum had always been able to obtain various scraps from outside the tower. Even so, Sejun still couldn't hide his amazement. Beaming, he said that Bat was truly amazing. On the other hand, Bat also felt the same happiness. Seeing Sejun smile and become enthusiastic again made him feel very happy. At the same time, the bear cub, who had just realized that Sejun was awake, immediately widened his eyes in surprise. A moment later, his loud scream echoed as he called Sejun's name, surprising Sejun himself when he heard it. Without holding back at all, the bear cub, overwhelmed by the urge, immediately ran toward him as fast as he could. In an instant, he tackled Sejun and hugged him very tightly. The impact was so strong that Bat was knocked out of Sejun's grasp. Meanwhile, Sejun's ribs throbbed with pain again from the emotional hug given by the bear cub. Sejun instantly lost his balance and fell backward. At the same time, the system immediately appeared and notified him that the indestructible body ability had been automatically activated. In the midst of that situation, the bear cub tightened its hug even more. Tears flowed down Mataharu's face, showing just how much worry he had always felt for Sejun. Meanwhile, Sejun, who was almost out of breath from the tight hug, could only speak haltingly, begging the bear cub to let him go. A few moments later, the bear cub finally loosened its hug. With a voice still full of emotion, he admitted that he was convinced they were all going to die when they were surrounded by the ant monsters. But at that most desperate moment, he saw the figure of a beautiful angel descend from the sky and save them all. Hearing that story, Sejun could only frown in confusion, wondering what kind of angel the bear cub was talking about. While trying to recall the vague event in his mind, Sejun admitted that he also felt like he had seen the figure of a beautiful woman who resembled an angel when he was on the brink of death. However, that memory felt so blurry that he couldn't remember it clearly. Curiosity began to fill his mind, making him wonder about what really happened during the blue moon eclipse. In the midst of that confusion, Garen came over looking overjoyed. He admitted that he was very relieved to see Sejun had regained consciousness and was in good condition. Not long after, Garen showed a small object he had brought. He explained that the object was found inside the fire ant monster's nest during the blue moon eclipse. On both of Garen's palms, there was a yellowish-green bean with an unusual pattern. Seeing the strange object, Sejun immediately asked what exactly was being shown to him. The longer he looked at it, the more confused he became. This was the first time he had seen a bean with such a unique combination of colors. The bear cub, who was also observing it, even swallowed hard. To him, the strange bean looked very appetizing. Even so, he held himself back and didn't touch it at all. Knowing that they all saved the item for him, Sejun's heart was filled with warmth. He then thanked Garan, the bear cub, and Bat. In his heart, Sejun truly felt lucky to have friends who always cared for and looked after him. While continuing to gaze at the colorful bean, Sejun couldn't help but think of Aelin. He wished Aelin was there with them, because maybe only Aelin knew what that mysterious object really was. Right at that moment, the system appeared and gave the answer. It turned out that the object was a 5-colored bean. On the other hand, Sejun's voice could be heard through a softly glowing crystal ball in front of him. With a tone of surprise and relief, he asked if Aelin had really returned. Hearing that question, Aelin answered with feelings that were hard to hide. He confirmed that he had indeed returned, although his tone sounded a bit disappointed. Sejun then revealed that Aylin's departure had made everyone worried. Hearing that, Aylin's feelings became even more mixed. He began to realize that Sejun actually didn't remember anything that happened during the blue moon eclipse. Suddenly, a memory flashed through Aylin's mind. The image of herself kissing the unconscious Sejun at that time appeared so clearly. That memory immediately made her face turn red and filled her heart with embarrassment. However, in front of Sejun, the system only conveyed Aylin's answer in an annoyed tone, as if she truly didn't know anything. The sudden change in reaction made Sejun even more surprised. Filled with confusion, Sejun began to wonder if he had unknowingly made a mistake. He also didn't understand why Aylin sounded so gloomy and anxious. Meanwhile, Aylin herself was overwhelmed with frustration. She revealed that she had forced her body to undergo the transformation process, and as a result, now she didn't know when she would be able to use that ability again. Even so, Sejun calmly said that the most important thing for him was that Aylin managed to survive. For him, that was more than enough. Sejun then expressed his gratitude once again. Sincerely, he reminded her that Aylin had protected him during the most dangerous situation yesterday. He also added that as long as they couldn't meet in person, he would try to cook much more delicious dishes for Aylin. Hearing those words, Aylin stayed silent, unable to respond. While wearing his signature hat, Sejun once again emphasized that he truly intended to prepare a meal even more special than before, just for Aylin. Those simple words actually made Aylin's heart tremble. Her face turned red again, and a faint smile slowly appeared on her lips. Suddenly, the system presented a new mission for Sejun. He was asked to create the most delicious dish using ingredients that had been infused with the energy of the blue moon eclipse. Seeing the mission, Sejun was immediately surprised and asked for a moment to think about it. Frowning, Sejun then remembered Theo and the others who were still carrying out their missions. Worry returned to his heart. He could only hope that they would all succeed in completing that task and return safely, so that one day they could gather together again, safe and sound. Meanwhile, inside the Red Ribbon Castle, Elka was sent flying and slammed hard into the floor. The impact was so strong that his body lay sprawled in the middle of the ruined battle arena. Without wasting any time, Pew immediately ran over and tried to heal him. Elka's body was covered in wounds from the fierce battle that had just taken place. Theo, seeing his condition, couldn't hide his anxiety and immediately checked on Elka. On the other hand, Iona, who also had some injuries, was seen speaking in a serious tone. She explained that the protection Grid had couldn't be penetrated by her magic at all. Not only that, the weapon Grid used could even cut off the flow of mana, making it much harder for her to use her magic to its full potential. In the midst of that situation, Grid stood tall with full confidence. There wasn't the slightest hint of doubt on his face. With a loud voice, he declared that he had come to face them after making very thorough preparations. A cynical smile appeared on his face as he turned his gaze to Pew. With a mocking tone, Grid implied that after all their efforts ended in vain, Pew should have already understood what was really happening. Even with a condescending laugh, Grid once again expressed his desire to make Pew his companion and rebuild the Red Ribbon Kingdom together. However, instead of being affected by those words, Pew only responded with a cold stare filled with disgust and revulsion. Not long after those words came out of Grid's mouth, a voice from another direction called out to him with an insulting nickname. Immediately, Grid turned around, trying to find the source of the voice that dared to say those words to him. That's when the figure of a black rabbit appeared. Its small body shot high into the air, then charged toward Grid at incredible speed. The large hammer in its hand swung fiercely, slicing through the air before striking toward its opponent. The sudden attack took Grid completely by surprise. For the first time since the battle began, his confident expression faltered. With eyes filled with rage, the black rabbit hurled an angry question about Grid's audacity to even think he was worthy of marrying Princess Pew. Without giving him a chance to answer, the black rabbit immediately bombarded Grid with a barrage of relentless attacks. Blow after blow landed without pause, forcing Grid to defend himself amid the continuous onslaught. He began to question the identity of the figure before him. In all the information he had ever gathered, there was not a single mention of anyone possessing such immense power. Seeing his confusion, the black rabbit prepared to attack once again. With her hammer ready to swing, she stared sharply at Grid and introduced herself with full confidence. The next moment, another attack was unleashed. The Black Rabbit's hammer struck Grid's body with thunderous force. The tremendous impact sparked a dazzling golden yellow light, illuminating the room for a moment. Amidst the explosion of power, the Black Rabbit proudly asserted its identity, that it was a knight who pledged its complete loyalty to Princess Pugh. Moments after taking the powerful blow from the Black Rabbit, Grid's body was thrown hard toward the wall. The force of the attack was so tremendous that the wall he hit shattered into pieces, scattering debris in all directions and shaking the entire room. With a serious gaze, the Black Rabbit remained standing tall while keeping an eye on his opponent. He wanted to see whether the attack he had just unleashed really had a significant impact on Grid. On the other hand, Princess Pugh could only stand frozen, watching the scene. Her heart was filled with awe at the heroic actions of the Black Rabbit. For the first time, she realized how much determination and courage that little knight had in protecting her. Meanwhile, Grid, who had been sent flying earlier, now crashed into a large cabinet in the corner of the room. The impact caused a cloud of dust and thin smoke that slowly covered the surrounding area. Amidst the scattered debris, a groan of pain could be heard coming from his mouth. Not long after, Grid's expression changed drastically. His face was filled with anger, while the veins on his forehead stood out clearly. His anger peaked because someone he had never considered a threat dared to attack him mercilessly. However, instead of being intimidated, the Black Rabbit stepped even closer. With a large hammer raised high above his head and a sharp, piercing gaze, he continued to approach Grid without the slightest hesitation. Seeing such overwhelming pressure, for the first time, Grid looked scared and tried to ask for a moment. That request meant nothing. In an instant, the Black Rabbit jumped high into the air again. His body shot forward like an arrow, before finally swinging his hammer straight at Grid. The hard impact sparked a dazzling golden yellow light and echoed throughout the room. Grid groaned in pain again. With a trembling voice, he realized something that made him even more panicked. The dragon tooth armor he had always been proud of was now destroyed because of that attack. In the midst of that situation, Iona stepped forward, gripping her magic staff tightly. With a calm yet firm tone, she declared that she had changed the decision she had previously made. Slowly, the magic staff in her hand began to emit a golden yellow light that grew brighter and brighter. Iona revealed that at the beginning of their meeting, her intention was simply to end everything quickly and destroy Grid right then and there. But now her decision is different. With a cold and serious look in her eyes, Iona declared that Grid must pay for every crime he has committed. Not in an instant, but little by little, until all of his actions receive the punishment they deserve. Those words made the fear on Grid's face become even more apparent. He immediately begged Iona to abandon her plan. In a hurry, he even promised to give up all his luck and everything he had, just to save himself. Grid kept talking non-stop. He offered the Red Ribbon Kingdom to be taken back, promised to disappear from their sight, and begged for his life to be spared. However, none of them believed him. Pugh, Elka, and Iona only stared at him with sharp, suspicious eyes. To them, Grid's words sounded like nothing more than the last attempt of someone who had been cornered. Soon after, Grid's scream echoed loudly, piercing through the castle walls. His voice, calling out Iona's name, sounded loud and full of panic, as if he was desperately searching for a last glimmer of hope. Meanwhile, outside the castle, the sky looked clear. The sun was shining brightly, creating a stark contrast to the chaos happening inside the kingdom. At the same time, the story shifts back to Sejun. Unlike the tense atmosphere in the Red Ribbon Castle, Sejun was filled with excitement at that moment. He couldn't wait to taste the ramen that Bat had brought. A happy smile stayed on his face, and he kept laughing. With high hopes, Sejun started to wonder if the ramen was ready to eat. Slowly, he picked up the bowl of ramen and began to open it. As soon as the lid was opened, a warm, rich, and tempting aroma immediately spread into the air. The scent was so strong that it left the bear cub and Bat stunned. It was the first time they had ever smelled food like that. Both of them unconsciously closed their eyes. They savored every bit of the aroma surrounding them. Curiosity mixed with amazement was clearly visible on their faces. It was as if the aroma alone was enough to whet their appetite. Sejun then lifted the ramen noodles with his chopsticks. His gaze was filled with admiration and a longing that was hard to hide. Without realizing it, his mouth began to water as he gazed at the food he hadn't seen in a long time. A moment later, he put the ramen noodles in his mouth. Sejun's expression immediately turned serious. He slowly slurped the noodles, one by one, savoring every flavor he had missed so much. For others, it might have just been an ordinary bowl of ramen, but for Sejun, that simple dish was a memory from the world he had left behind long ago. On the other side, the bear cub and bat watched with sparkling eyes. They observed every bite Sejun took with great curiosity. They were eager to see how this unfamiliar food, new to them, could make him so happy. In an instant, the explosion of flavors from the ramen filled Sejun's mouth. The warmth of the broth, the soft texture of the noodles, and the familiar taste on his tongue made his heart tremble. After being separated from his original world for so long, he finally got to taste food from Earth again. The longing he had held back for so long seemed to break with that first bite. And before he knew it, tears began to stream down his cheeks. However, Sejun's reaction was misunderstood by the bear cub and bat. The bear cub looked surprised to see Sejun crying after eating it, while Bat immediately panicked and became worried. He quickly checked whether Sejun disliked the gift he had worked so hard to bring. Even though he was still shedding tears, Sejun quickly explained that the ramen actually tasted very delicious. Hearing this, the bear cub's curiosity grew even more. He also hoped to taste the food that could move Sejun so much. Unfortunately, Sejun, who had missed ramen for so long, kept eating it non-stop until there was nothing left. Not long after, the empty ramen container was tossed to the back. With a guilty tone, Sejun apologized for finishing everything by himself. Hearing that, the bear cub immediately froze in disappointment. In an instant, the bear cub dropped to the ground, crying in frustration. He felt that Sejun was so mean for not leaving him even a little. Bat, who witnessed Sejun's change in attitude, could only stand there in confusion. Meanwhile, Sejun apologized again, admitting that he really couldn't share the food he had missed so much. Feeling amused, Sejun then grabbed Bat and rubbed his head enthusiastically. He praised Bat's ability, saying he was really smart at finding food from outside the tower. Hearing the praise, Bat laughed happily. Not long after, Sejun told him that starting that day, Bat would undergo special training. Those words made Bat tilt his head in confusion. Sejun then picked up a piece of wood and started writing a letter on the ground. He explained that the writing was a Hangul letter. After that, he wrote several other words. Bat, who was watching closely, admitted that he often saw similar writing when he was outside the tower. Hearing that, Sejun immediately took advantage of the opportunity. He asked Bat to start bringing objects with such writing every time he left the tower from now on. The request was immediately met with enthusiasm. Bat raised one of his hands like a soldier receiving an important order and declared his willingness to do it for Sejun. While they were still talking, Flam suddenly appeared and called out to Sejun. Meanwhile, the bear cub was still sitting gloomily in the back, staring at the empty ramen container that bore witness to his disappointment. Not long after, Flam came along with 3 green chickens that had now grown much bigger. Seeing their transformation, Sejun looked surprised and amazed at how quickly they had grown. Sejun wondered if this rapid growth was due to the influence of the blue moon eclipse. As if understanding the question, the 3 green chickens immediately flapped their wings happily in front of Sejun. At the same time, Sejun suddenly remembered something. He took out the 5 colored beans he had found earlier and said that it was now time to plant them. He planned to grow the beans by using the remaining energy from the blue moon eclipse. A moment later, Sejun called the bear cub to come with him. However, the bear cub was still lost in disappointment and kept staring blankly at the ramen container that had long been empty. Seeing that sad expression, Sejun finally made an offer that immediately changed the mood. He said that after planting the 5 colored beans, they would enjoy large sweet potatoes together. Hearing those words, the bear cub's spirits immediately reignited. In an instant, his gloomy face turned bright. He even double-checked to make sure they really would eat the sweet potatoes. Because he was too excited, the bear cub suddenly pulled Sejun's hand with all his strength. The pull was so strong that Sejun's arm looked broken. Sejun immediately grimaced in pain, while the system quickly appeared and informed him that his indestructible body ability had been activated automatically. Meanwhile, in a completely different place, the black wolf Hegel and the silver wolf Elka were seen standing in a corridor, their bodies covered in battle wounds. Both of them kept growling while staring ahead on full alert. In front of them, the Dragon Fang soldiers still stood firm like an impenetrable wall. Seeing the endless number and strength of their opponents, LK began to feel hopeless and thought that this was the end of their journey. But just as hope began to fade, a voice was heard from behind. Someone called them Chief. The sudden shout made Hegel and LK turn around in surprise. At the same time, an axe spun quickly through the air. The weapon shot forward with tremendous force toward the line of Dragon Fang soldiers in front of them. Seeing that scene, LK was both confused and surprised. He felt he recognized that weapon very well. In his mind, only one name came to mind: Guilotin, the sacred relic of the Silver Wolf clan, which had always been considered a legendary artifact. Not long after, LK appeared carrying Guilotin and informed LK that Grid had been defeated. He also explained that the legendary weapon was the one previously used by Grid in battle. Upon hearing the news, LK immediately took action without wasting any time. With incredible speed, he shot forward and immediately grabbed the holy relic called Guilotin with his mouth. Without a hint of hesitation, the weapon was immediately swung toward the ranks of the Dragontooth soldiers. In an instant, the power of Guilotin revealed its might. The soldiers who had been so difficult to defeat were now destroyed with a single slash. The sight left Hegel stunned. He never expected that Guilotin could crush dragon bones so easily. A sense of relief filled his heart, and he didn't forget to thank LK, who arrived just in time and saved their lives. However, in the midst of that relief, LK realized something strange. With a puzzled tone, he questioned why the Dragon Fang soldiers kept fighting even though Grit was already dead. At that moment, LK was seen biting down hard on Guilotin while staring seriously ahead. In front of them, the Dragon Fang soldiers were still standing firm and showed no signs of retreating at all. Seeing the situation, Hegel explained that the presence of the soldiers who kept holding their ground could only lead to one possibility. They were still guarding something important, its location still unknown. Meanwhile, in another room, Grit's body looked charred from the magic attack that hit him. Thin smoke kept rising from his body, while sparks of fiery energy could still be seen faintly burning. In a halting, barely audible voice, Grit called out Iona's name. After receiving that devastating magic attack, Grit's condition was truly miserable. His body was covered in burns, and the smell of something charred filled the room. Theo, who was there, even commented that the burnt smell reminded him of the smell of burnt peanuts. On the other hand, Iona still couldn't contain her annoyance. Seeing that Grit was still breathing, she was determined to make sure that man truly received punishment for all the crimes he had committed. Not long after, Iona's mood improved a little. With great excitement, she announced that she had found the deed to the kingdom's land. That important document became proof that the Red Ribbon Kingdom was finally back in the right hands. As soon as she received the deed, Pew immediately cried tears of joy. All the struggles, sacrifices, and hardships they had gone through finally paid off. Meanwhile, Theo, who was still harboring anger toward Grit, kept hitting his body with his open claws. In an annoyed tone, he demanded answers about Zerath's whereabouts. In a helpless state and unable to fight back, Grit finally cried and admitted that Zerath was locked up in the treasure room. That answer left Iona confused. For her, it didn't make sense why someone would choose to lock a prisoner in the treasure room instead of in a prison. However, Pew immediately gave his opinion. If Zerath really is in the treasure room, then most likely they can access that place directly from that room. Before leaving, Iona first raised her magic staff. A sparkling white light appeared from the tip of the staff and shot toward Grit's body. Calmly, she explained that she was binding Grit with artifact magic so that he couldn't escape. Not long after that, Pew, the Black Rabbit, Theo, and Iona found a secret door that was open. Behind it was a staircase leading far down, toward the treasure room where Zerath was believed to be held. Without wasting any time, they quickly ran down the stairs while calling out Zerath's name. letting him know that help had finally arrived. But when they arrived at their destination, they found a large door that was tightly locked. The door was decorated with a giant gold ribbon that looked both luxurious and sturdy. Seeing the obstacle, Theo immediately asked Pew if the door could be opened. Unfortunately, Pew explained that the door couldn't be opened without the proper key. At the same time, Iona reminded them that almost all of Grit's belongings had been burned in the previous battle. Only the white dragon emblem remained. Hearing that, Black Rabbit immediately suggested the only way she could think of. She intended to break down the door using her trusty hammer. However, Pew quickly dismissed the idea. Convinced that the attempt would not work, while the others were thinking of a way out, Theo stood still, looking up. His hand supported his chin, and his mind worked hard to find another way to open the treasure room. After a while, Theo kept racking his brain, trying to remember what object could possibly be used as a key. Then suddenly, a memory flashed through his mind. Quickly, he reached into the lower pocket. His expression slowly changed to one of confidence as he realized that he might have something they needed. The Black Rabbit and Pew could only watch with curiosity as Theo took something out of his pocket. Soon after, a key with a red ribbon appeared in his hand. While showing it to everyone, Theo asked a question that immediately sparked new hope. Perhaps that key was the one they had been searching for all this time to open the door to the treasure room. When Theo tried to use the key he had to open the locked door, the Black Rabbit could only watch skeptically. For him, it was impossible for the Red Ribbon Kingdom's treasure room to be opened that easily. However, something completely unexpected happened. With a single turn, the key Theo brought actually fit. The sound of the lock mechanism moving echoed softly, followed by the slow opening of the large door. The sight immediately shocked everyone present. No one expected that the key Theo had could open the palace's treasure room. Seeing that, Iona immediately looked at Theo in amazement. She couldn't fathom how Theo could have the key that was supposed to grant access to one of the most secret places in the Red Ribbon Kingdom. That question made Theo instantly nervous. He seemed hesitant before finally revealing the origin of the key. With a slightly awkward tone, he explained that he got the key from the merchant raccoons. Even after giving an answer, Theo himself was still filled with curiosity. He didn't understand why the merchant raccoons could have something that important. The more he thought about it, the harder it was for him to find a reasonable explanation. Not wanting to waste any more time, as soon as the door opened, Iona, Pew, Black Rabbit, and the others immediately stepped into the room. They immediately called out Xerath's name, hoping he was really there. But after just a few steps into the room, the atmosphere suddenly changed. An overwhelming pressure suddenly enveloped the entire area. The air felt much heavier, as if a great force was forcing them to stop moving. At the same time, a deep voice echoed, questioning who dared to come and disturb that place. The scene before them slowly began to come into focus. Inside the room, piles of gold coins towered high, glittering under the dim light. Theo, who felt the pressure directly, could only swallow hard. He even stammered as he realized that the creature before them possessed an energy far beyond anything he had ever felt before. And when that figure finally revealed itself clearly, all their doubts disappeared. The creature standing in the middle of the pile of gold turned out to be a white dragon. With a piercing gaze that seemed able to penetrate the soul, the dragon stared at them without blinking. Meanwhile, its aura of power continued to fill the room, making the atmosphere feel even more tense. In the peaceful farming area, Sejun was seen picking purple tomatoes that emitted a soft glow. As he observed his harvest, he showed a clear sense of satisfaction. He felt that the tomatoes had grown perfectly. According to him, the energy from the blue moon eclipse had an extraordinary effect on the growth of the plants. Around him, the rabbits looked busy, harvesting the sparkling purple tomatoes, creating a scene filled with activity and hope. Not long after, the bear cub called out to Sejun excitedly, having just seen something. With a proud face, he showed off the harvest he had gathered by himself. Sejun responded with joy and curiosity, asking if the entire harvest was really gathered by the bear cub alone. His curiosity grew even more when he saw that only blue sweet potatoes had been harvested. The bear cub then explained that the blue potatoes had such a unique aroma that it was easy for him to recognize them. Hearing that explanation, Sejun smiled warmly and then patted the bear cub's head with appreciation. He realized that this ability would be very helpful for them in sorting and harvesting blue potatoes more efficiently. Not long after, the system appeared and announced that Sejun had successfully harvested 200 plants affected by the blue moon eclipse energy. That achievement provided a significant experience boost. It didn't stop there. The system appeared again and announced that Sejun's work experience had reached the maximum limit. He was also upgraded from a C-rank tower farmer to a B-rank tower farmer. Along with that upgrade, all abilities related to his profession were also enhanced. A moment after the notification appeared, Sejun's body suddenly emitted a bright blue light that enveloped him. The sight made him both surprised and happy. With great enthusiasm, he raised both his hands in the air, celebrating his success at finally leveling up. The bear cub, witnessing the reaction, stayed silent in confusion. Meanwhile, Sejun's favorite hat, which he always wore, started shining with a bright yellow light. When Sejun looked up, the system provided new information again. His identity has now been confirmed as a rank B tower farmer. The relic, St. Patrick's straw hat, has also been upgraded to the same rank, while all previous restrictions that limited rank B abilities have officially been lifted. The system then continued with a series of notifications about his ability upgrades. Earth's Blessing ability level 5, Farmer's Body level 4, Hope for a Bountiful Harvest level, 3 Growth Promotion level 2, and Farmer's Talent level 1 are now all unlocked without restrictions. Hearing all that, Sejun looked truly stunned. For him, this development felt incredible, especially because he now gained new abilities he had never had before. It didn't stop there. The system announced another bonus. For every 1,000 identical crops harvested, Sejun would automatically receive 1 extra crop. Upon hearing about this new ability, Sejun immediately realized how useful this advantage would be for the future of his farming. While resting his hand on his chin, Sejun began calculating the progress of his mission. He wondered how many more harvests he needed to complete to reach the target of 100,000 harvests. The system immediately provided the answer. Currently, Sejun has completed 49,983 harvests and still needs 50,017 more harvests to reach the target. Knowing that number, Sejun realized that he had just passed the halfway point toward completing his big mission. With great enthusiasm, he showed off the muscles in his arm and stated that now he just needed to focus on finishing the rest of the goal. The bear cub, who saw his behavior, commented that Sejun looked very enthusiastic that day. Even so, in his heart, Sejun felt that he had found something important. He realized that he still needed to become stronger. That's why he was determined to use the best harvest he had as a source of strength. Eat quality food and continue to improve his abilities. That burning determination even rubbed off on the bear cub, who was filled with enthusiasm when he heard it. Meanwhile, the story shifts back to the treasure room inside the Red Ribbon Palace. There, a powerful aura pressed down on Theo, Piu Piu, the Black Rabbit, and Iona as they arrived. The presence of that energy felt so sorrowful, as if questioning the reason they entered the room. Iona was immediately startled when she felt the pressure and began to wonder why dragon energy could appear in that place. Even under tremendous pressure, the Black Rabbit still tried to stand tall. With unwavering courage, he introduced himself as a warrior from the Black Rabbit group to the figure standing before them. Hearing that, the white dragon with red eyes showed his displeasure. He felt both surprised and annoyed because the small black-furred creature dared to speak first before getting his permission. In an instant, the dragon's anger exploded. His voice thundered throughout the entire room as he introduced himself as the white dragon named Cleon Marmeth. The wave of pressure from his voice was so intense that it created a strong gust of wind in every direction. At the same time, Iona immediately cast a protective spell to withstand the impact of that pressure. Meanwhile, the entire treasure room seemed to tremble under the authority of that terrifying white dragon. At that moment, she took shelter behind the protective spell she had created. Iona immediately ordered everyone to leave the room. She prepared to hold back Cleon with all her might, even though she herself realized how vast the gap in power was between them. But a moment later, Cleon slowly raised one of his hands. A thin white light shone from the palm of his hand, and instantly, the terrible pressure that had previously filled the room slowly disappeared. After the pressure disappeared, Theo, Pew Pew, and Iona were finally able to breathe more easily, although the tension still lingered in the air. In an annoyed tone, Cleon sarcastically remarked that Grid was indeed useless. According to him, that man had forced him to step in to solve a problem that shouldn't have involved him in the first place. Cleon then expressed the annoyance he had been holding back all this time toward everything related to the Black Tower. In front of him, Iona could only stare as her body trembled, realizing that the White Dragon's magic was on a completely different level from anything she had ever faced. Slowly, Cleon opened his mouth. Reddish smoke began to billow out, carrying a threatening and deadly magical aura. Without the slightest hesitation, he immediately unleashed that power toward Iona and the others, intending to wipe them out. Cleon's destructive magic shot out so quickly, striking toward Iona, Pew Pew, the Black Rabbit, and Theo, who were frozen in place. The pressure from that power was so overwhelming that their bodies felt locked in place and difficult to move. Even the Black Rabbit, who was usually never afraid, could only glance at Pew Pew with an anxious expression. His body was trembling violently, while he realized that he couldn't even move a single part of his body. Realizing that they were facing a dragon with extraordinary power, Pew Pew gathered all his courage and shouted loudly, ordering Cleon to stop his attack. Not long after, the red ribbon he was wearing began to lengthen on its own. A beautiful red light shone from the ribbon, enveloping the room with a dazzling glow. The sight took the Black Rabbit by surprise because he didn't expect it at all. In an instant, an explosion of energy occurred. Cleon's powerful attack struck something invisible and was stopped right in front of them. Cleon was instantly shocked. Even though he was only bound by a statue and couldn't use his full power yet, he still didn't expect his attack to be stopped. Astonished, Cleon wondered how it was possible that Pew Pew, whom he had always considered a weak and insignificant creature, dared to block his attack. At the same time, Theo, Iona, and the Black Rabbit could only stand frozen, witnessing what had just happened. Pew Pew had protected all of them from the blast of the White Dragon's magic. With a determined look, Pew Pew declared that he would no longer allow the invaders to trample on them. While tightly holding the letter in his hand, he asserted that the palace belonged to him, as well as to the person who had trusted him. When the contents of the letter were shown to Cleon, the energy from his red ribbon immediately shot forward and emitted a sparkling light. With a loud and confident voice, Pew Pew asserted that the Red Ribbon Palace was his. Instantly, the red ribbon moved like a living creature and wrapped around Cleon's body from all directions. The White Dragon looked panicked and didn't understand what kind of attack was restraining him. Filled with rage, he couldn't believe that a creature he had always considered inferior dared to attack him. While Pew Pew floated in the air, continuously channeling his power, Iona looked up and finally understood what was happening. He realized that Pew Pew's red ribbon, a relic from the Rabbit tribe, was actually one of the 10 strongest sacred relics in the Black Tower. Apparently, the artifact was reacting to the land ownership deed that Pew Pew was holding, awakening its true power that had been dormant all this time. That realization made Iona unable to hide her surprise. It felt like just yesterday she was holding little Pew Pew in her arms. But now, right before her eyes, she saw someone who had grown up and stood as a person worthy of leading a nation. With pride filling her heart, Pew Pew loudly declared to Cleon Marmef, the White Dragon, that she had driven him off the 55th floor. Hearing that statement, Cleon, who was bound by a red ribbon, immediately shouted loudly, begging Pew Pew to stop what she was doing. For him, the incident made no sense at all. However, Pew Pew ignored the plea. On the contrary, her red ribbon kept moving and completely locked Cleon's body, without giving the dragon any chance to break free. A moment later, Cleon's body was indeed swallowed by a blinding light. The figure of the White Dragon slowly disappeared from sight, while Pew Pew, who had used up all her strength, suddenly lost all energy and fell limp. Quickly, the Black Rabbit immediately caught Pew Pew's limp body as she fell from the air. He hugged her tightly to keep her from hitting the ground, then looked at her with eyes full of emotion. In his mind, he believed that everything had finally come to an end. The danger that had been looming over them all this time had vanished, and for the first time, they could feel peace. Hearing that, Piu Piu could only respond with a faint smile. Tears slowly streamed down her cheeks, carrying away the burden of all the struggles she had endured. All the efforts, sacrifices, and suffering they went through were not in vain. On the other hand, Theo glanced at Iona with a sense of relief that was hard to express. All the threats that had been troubling them were finally eliminated. The atmosphere that had previously became a warm silence, leaving a sense of emotion that filled every corner of the room. Meanwhile, the story shifts back to the farming area. Under the bright and peaceful sky, someone could be heard calling Sejun Park's name in an unfriendly tone. That person turned out to be Kaiser. With an annoyed expression, he questioned how it was possible that he had gone through all the trouble to arrange a special meeting between Sejun and Aline. But Sejun didn't remember anything about the event. What made him even more upset was that Sejun still hadn't made Maggioli for him. Instead of feeling intimidated, Sejun took a deep breath before answering calmly. In his opinion, no one was more frustrated than he was at that moment. He himself couldn't remember his meeting with Aileen, something he really wanted to know about. But amid all that confusion, Sejun still wondered why the first thing Kaiser complained about was the Maggioli. In a firm tone, Sejun emphasized that the Maggioli belonged to him. All this time, he had given it freely because he considered Kaiser as family. That's why he asked Kaiser not to take the kindness he had given for granted. Those words immediately made Kaiser feel guilty. Sejun then added that he was busy harvesting crops to help with Aileen's recovery, while Kaiser kept bothering him with unimportant complaints. While awkwardly scratching his cheek, Kaiser finally apologized. Even so, Sejun said that he would still make Maggioli for him. However, this time Kaiser had to learn to be a little more considerate towards Sejun. Hearing this, Kaiser accepted the advice well. On the other hand, the sickle rabbit and the other rabbits could only be amazed at the scene in front of them. How could someone like Sejun make the Black Dragon King do what he said? Not long after, Kaiser clenched one of his fists a little shyly. He expressed his desire to give Sejun a gift as an apology, as well as a token of appreciation for everything he had done. Hearing that, Sejun looked confused. Slowly, Kaiser opened his palm and revealed a beautiful shimmering black dragon scale. He explained that the item would be very helpful to Sejun someday. Even though he still didn't fully understand the use of the gift, Sejun accepted it gratefully and thanked him. Kaiser just chuckled softly before reminding Sejun again to make the promised Maggioli soon. But right at that moment, something unexpected happened. The Wartel statue built by the rabbits suddenly emitted a dazzling bright light. Sejun and Kaiser, who were not far from there, immediately turned around with surprised expressions. Filled with confusion, Sejun wondered why the statue was emitting such a strong light. A rabbit, driven by curiosity, approached to take a closer look. Without any prior warning, the Wartel statue suddenly exploded with a blinding light in all directions. The bright flash made everyone fall silent. Then, from within the light, a white dragon slowly began to reveal itself. That figure was none other than Cleon. With a voice trembling with anger, Cleon vented his frustration at Pew, who had just expelled him from the 55th floor. The sudden appearance of the white dragon left Sejun frozen in place. He couldn't even utter a single word. The rabbits standing nearby were just as shocked. However, unlike them, Kaiser immediately recognized the figure of the dragon that had just appeared. In an instant, Kaiser shot into the air and flew toward Cleon. With a tone full of anger, he confirmed the identity of the white dragon now standing before him. Cleon was also surprised when he realized who was standing in front of him. He never expected to meet Kaiser in a place like that. At the same time, the energy from both dragons immediately collided. Their auras clashed fiercely against each other, as if two great powers were destined to be enemies. Both Kaiser and Cleon saw each other as eternal foes. The wave of energy radiating from their clash was so intense that the ground around them was lifted and scattered into the air. The tremor of that power spread throughout the entire farm, creating a terrifying scene. Seeing all of this, Sejun could only gape in shock. It wasn't just because a battle between two legendary dragons was happening right before his eyes, but because of one bitter truth he had just realized. the conflict between Cleon and he had painstakingly cared for. With the energies constantly clashing, the atmosphere on the farm turned into a field of overwhelming pressure. At that moment, Kaiser glared at Cleon in annoyance, judging that the white dragon had a lot of nerve entering his territory. However, Cleon did not accept the accusation at all and showed his displeasure clearly. On the other hand, the rabbits struggled with all their might to withstand the fierce winds created by the clash of the two dragons' powers. With great difficulty, they asked Sejun to do something quickly, while Sejun himself could only grimace as his body was continuously battered by the increasingly strong gusts of wind. Cleon then vented his frustration at Kaiser. For years, he couldn't even enjoy his meat in peace because of that black dragon's actions. However, Kaiser had his own version of the story. According to him, it all started because Cleon first stole the snack he had specially saved for his 40,000th birthday celebration. Even so, Cleon still considered Kaiser's actions to be way out of line. In fact, during their quarrels in the past, Kaiser once hit him in the teeth so hard. Hearing the never-ending argument, Sejun finally cast a protective spell and tried to calm the two dragons who kept quarreling. Sejun's warning made Kaiser and Cleon fall silent for a moment. Both of them turned to him with confused looks, as if they didn't expect anyone to dare interrupt their quarrel. Standing on top of the artifact, protected by the magic he created himself, Sejun raised his voice firmly. While pointing in Kaiser's direction, he expressed his disappointment at the Black Dragon's behavior, which he considered too childish. Hearing the reprimand, Kaiser seemed to want to give an explanation. However, Cleon's attention was focused on something else. His eyes narrowed when he saw the stone Sejun was standing on, an artifact he believed to be a sacred inscription created by the gods. Without giving Sejun a chance to explain, Cleon's anger flared up again. He felt that Sejun had dared to step on something considered a sacred relic. Tremendous energy kept radiating from the white dragon's body and struck at Sejun. Even so, the young man continued to stand tall behind his protective magic. Calmly, Sejun explained that the inscription was the only place he could stand amid the constant pressure of energy released by Kaiser and Cleon. But after that, his tone became firm. He reminded Cleon that if the white dragon didn't want to be expelled from the 99th floor again, then he should stop all the chaos he was causing. The threat of expulsion immediately sparked Cleon's anger once again. Red light began to gather in his mouth, ready to be unleashed at any moment. In his mind, Sejun was just an insignificant figure, but now he dared to challenge him openly. Cleon's anger finally exploded uncontrollably. In an instant, he unleashed a powerful attack directly at Sejun, convinced that the young man would fall by his hand that very day. Seeing this, Kaiser was instantly shocked and immediately tried to stop him. But it was already too late. Cleon's attack had already been unleashed and shot forward uncontrollably. As the blast of fire breath headed toward the farmland that had been painstakingly cared for all this time, Sejun's expression immediately changed. The anger that had been held back all this time began to boil inside him. Kaiser immediately pushed Cleon and told him to stop, but the white dragon was still filled with rage. He even intended to turn the Black Tower into an abandoned and ruined place. Meanwhile, with a cold gaze never seen before, Sejun made a decision. He prepared to expel Cleon. Not long after, a dimensional circle began to appear beneath Cleon's feet. Seeing that phenomenon, the white dragon immediately panicked and became confused, not understanding what Sejun was doing to him. With one hand radiating magic, Sejun expressed his annoyance. Cleon had destroyed the garden they had cared for with so much struggle and hard work, and at that moment, with a loud voice echoing throughout the entire farming area, Sejun called out Aileen's name. Elsewhere, a system notification suddenly appeared, informing that dragon energy had been detected in the Black Tower. After conducting an analysis, the system found that there was energy belonging to Leon, reaching 30% and originating from the White Tower. Seeing the report, Aileen looked confused. While pondering, Aileen tried to understand what was happening. According to her estimation, the appearance of the dragon was likely related to the statue that contained a part of Grandpa Leon's soul inside it. That's why, if Cleon was forcibly expelled, then the part of the soul connected to the statue would be at risk of being erased as well. Not long after, Aileen gave Sejun the authority as the middle manager to make decisions. Now the decision is in Sejun's hands. Will he really expel the 30% fragment of Cleon's soul that was serving as manager of the White Tower? At the same time, Kaiser also explained to Cleon that Sejun was the middle manager in their tower and had full authority to expel him at any time. That explanation immediately shocked Cleon. He didn't expect that the person he had always considered ordinary actually held an important position in the tower. Confusion filled his mind as he tried to accept that reality. Not long after, Cleon expressed his disbelief to Kaiser. He questioned why Kaiser would entrust the tower to someone who, in his view, was just a weak and lowly person. But for Kaiser, that judgment actually showed that Cleon still didn't understand who Sejun really was. While still restraining Cleon's body, Kaiser reminded him that at that moment, Cleon was on the verge of losing 30% of his soul. In that condition, Cleon wasn't even stronger than the person he had always underestimated. That's why Kaiser asked Sejun to take firm action and immediately expel Cleon from their tower. However, before making a decision, Sejun chose to talk first. He wanted to know what Cleon would do after all the chaos that had happened. Calmly but firmly, Sejun stated that he had the ability to erase a part of Cleon's soul right then and there. Even so, he was still willing to give him a chance. If Cleon promised not to harm him or anyone living in the tower, and was willing to provide compensation for all the losses he had caused, then he would cancel the expulsion. Hearing those conditions, fear immediately enveloped Cleon. The arrogance that had previously filled him slowly faded, replaced by a desire to ensure his own survival. In the end, he expressed his willingness to follow whatever Sejun decided. However, the way Cleon spoke to Sejun still sounded disrespectful to Kaiser's ears. Without hesitation, Kaiser immediately delivered a hard punch and forced him to show a more proper attitude towards Sejun. With a serious look, Sejun then officially introduced himself as the Black Tower's middle manager. Not long after that, an agreement between Sejun Park and Cleon Marmafe was finally reached. The agreement marked the endpoint of the tension that had once peaked between them. Crossing his arms, Kaiser said that Cleon should be grateful because Sejun didn't immediately take harsher action. However, Sejun immediately asked Kaiser to stop provoking and making the situation worse. In a calmer tone, Sejun admitted that Kaiser and Cleon did indeed hold a grudge that had lasted for a very long time. Even so, he hoped that the two of them could end the conflict and stop being hostile to each other. At the same time, Papa Clinchy looked dejected as he gazed at the damaged farmland, expressing his distress over all the hard work that had been put into it so far. Hearing that, Sejun immediately comforted Papa Clinchy and Mama Clinchy. He assured them that the damage only affected part of the land and could still be repaired. For him, the most important thing right now was that everyone managed to survive. After that, Sejun invited them to have breakfast together so they could regain their strength before continuing with their work. Just before walking away, Sejun realized that Kaiser and Cleon were still standing behind him. Letting out a long sigh, he decided to set aside the chaos they had caused earlier. With an open heart, Sejun invited both of them to join them for a meal. Not long after, the system appeared again and informed them that the sweet purple potato soup had been successfully cooked. At the same time, Sejun's cooking skills improved significantly. On top of the warmly burning stove, there was a large pot filled with purple potato soup that gave off an appetizing aroma. After the dish was finished, Sejun took a bowl of the soup and gave it to Cleon, inviting him to enjoy the meal that had been prepared. Then, Sejun also handed a bowl of the same soup to Kaiser. But as usual, the Black Dragon instead asked about the roasted sweet potatoes, which were his favorite food. Unfortunately, Sejun had only prepared purple potato soup that morning. Hearing that answer, Kaiser once again showed his dissatisfaction. According to him, roasted sweet potatoes should always be available for him because that food has been his favorite for a long time. Hearing those endless complaints, Sejun could only let out a long sigh. His patience had finally reached its limit. In an irritated tone, Sejun openly scolded Kaiser. If Kaiser truly wanted his favorite food, then he shouldn't have helped destroy the field that had been carefully tended from the beginning. The scolding immediately made Kaiser fall silent. His face turned stiff, and for the first time since the argument ended, a clear sense of guilt was visible on him. Next, Sejun said that opportunities like that should be very rare. After all, they had just managed to harvest crops filled with blue moon eclipse energy, something that is not easy to find. Hearing that, Kaiser, who was still filled with guilt, finally apologized to Sejun. On the other hand, Mama Clinchy and Papa Clinchy were busy handing out bowl after bowl of purple potato soup to the others. Some of them were even already eating the dish heartily. Meanwhile, Cleon, who was holding a bowl of soup in his hands, could only watch the scene in amazement. Slowly, curiosity started to get the better of him. Cleon finally tried tasting the purple potato soup himself to see if the food was really as delicious as it looked. At the same time, the soul of Cleon's grandfather, who was inside him, also received a bowl of purple potato soup. Calmly, he held the spoon and got ready to taste Sejun's cooking. Slowly, he took a spoonful into his mouth. In an instant, his eyes opened wide. The taste that filled his palate was so unfamiliar, yet incredibly captivating. In his entire life, he had never tasted anything like it. Without saying a single word, Cleon's grandfather just nodded slowly. The expression on his face said it all. Meanwhile, Cleon, who was in his white dragon form, revealed something that left everyone confused. According to him, the taste of the purple potato soup really frustrated him. Hearing that strange comment, Kaiser could only look at him with a confused expression. Not long after, Cleon suddenly shouted loudly. He admitted that he was getting more and more frustrated because he couldn't understand how Sejun, whom he had always thought of as the Black Tower's chef, was able to create such delicious food. In a hurry, Cleon immediately called Sejun and asked if there was any purple potato soup left. The question made Sejun pause for a moment. A while ago, the same dragon even intended to finish him off, but now he was eagerly begging for food. Even so, Sejun still remembered that Cleon was still obligated to provide compensation for all the chaos he had caused. While pointing to the back, Sejun told him that there should still be a little soup left in the pot, and allowed Cleon to take it himself. However, when Cleon looked into the pot, all he found was the empty bottom of the pot. There wasn't a single drop of soup left. Apparently, all the remaining soup had been finished by the bear cub, who was now lying on the ground with a full belly and a satisfied face. Seeing that, Cleon immediately felt annoyed. With a disappointed tone, he complained that there was no soup left and asked Sejun to make another portion just for him. That request made Sejun feel puzzled again. With a sharp gaze, Sejun turned to Cleon. Blue magical light began to radiate from his hand, as he reminded Cleon that anyone who heard what Cleon had just said would surely think he was just the dragon's subordinate. The dimensional circle still beneath Cleon's feet made the white dragon instantly shrink back. Fear enveloped him once again, and he hurriedly apologized for his rude behavior. However, Sejun still emphasized one thing that he considered very important. With a serious tone, Sejun explained that he was not the tower's chef. He was a Black Tower farmer, and that was the identity that mattered most to him. During the mission to rescue Zerat, at that time, the chains that bound both of his hands were finally broken by the hammer belonging to the Black Rabbit. As soon as the chains were broken, Theo immediately approached Zerat and checked on him. With great concern, he asked if Zerat was okay. While rubbing his hand that still felt sore, Zerat assured them that he was not seriously hurt and thanked them for the great effort they had made to save him. On the other hand, Yona explained that earlier, Grit had admitted to locking Zerat in the treasure room. However, in reality, the man still chose to lie until the very last moment. Hearing this, Zerat once again expressed his gratitude. However, curiosity soon arose in his mind. He asked how they managed to get past the dragon-tooth soldiers guarding the castle area. Teo then explained that they had managed to capture Grid. Even more than that, they also managed to drive away the white dragon thanks to Pew's red ribbon power. That explanation surprised Zerat. With an anxious and curious tone, he asked how it was possible for Pew to do something that big. Theo then explained that Pew used a sacred relic in the form of a red ribbon to drive away the white dragon. However, Pew himself actually looked confused when he heard that explanation. With a puzzled expression, Pew admitted that up until that moment, He still didn't really understand what had actually happened to him before. Even so, Iona quickly calmed the situation. She said one thing mattered much more than all that confusion. After the long and risky struggle they went through, the Red Ribbon Kingdom was finally safe again and in the right hands. Hearing that, Zerath was finally able to breathe easier. He slowly began to voice the guilt that had been weighing on him, because he felt that he had been the source of the various problems that happened. However, Theo disagreed. For him, Zerath didn't need to blame himself. Among all of them, Zerath actually had a much sharper intuition, and that had helped them more than he realized. With deep gratitude, Zerath once again expressed his thanks for Theo's hard work and the entire group's efforts, who had risked so much to save him. He even assured them that when they visited the Merchants Association later, his father would sincerely reward them for all their efforts. However, Theo explained that the visit would likely have to be postponed for now. There was still one important matter he had to take care of, which was to fulfill the agreement he had made with Sejun. A large number of goods were still waiting to be delivered to the humans living on the lower floors. Without wasting any time, Theo immediately jumped onto Elka's back. With the passion still burning after their long struggle, he conveyed that everyone had worked incredibly hard. After saying his goodbyes, Theo got ready to continue his journey to the 38th floor. Moments after Theo, Elka, and Serigala Hita left the place, Iona looked in the direction they had gone and remarked that Theo was truly on the path to becoming a top-class traveling merchant. However, in the middle of the conversation, Zerath shared his first impression when he met Theo. In his eyes, Theo was not just a potential great merchant. Theo is the best traveling merchant he has ever known. Meanwhile, the story shifts to the 99th floor. There, the system reappeared and announced that the 5 colored beans had been successfully planted. At the same time, Sejun's work experience increased rapidly. His planting skill has now risen to level 6, while his level 1 proficiency skill gained an additional effect that increases planting efficiency by 5%. Once everything was settled and mealtime ended, Sejun looked around and said it was time to restore the damaged plantation. Hearing that, Papa Rabbit, the bear cub, and the other rabbits immediately showed great enthusiasm. They looked ready to get back to work to restore the field to its original state. However, just before Sejun walked away, a poisonous bee flew over and approached him. Its presence made Sejun stop for a moment and wonder if something had happened. However, when he looked more closely at the bee, Sejun felt that something was different. In front of him now hovered an unfamiliar poisonous bee. Although its shape was not much different from the bees he had seen before, Sejun was sure that he had never seen this particular bee before. What was even stranger, the poisonous bee did not immediately reveal why it had come. It just hovered silently in front of Sejun, as if it was thinking about something, while continuing to watch the figure standing before it attentively. Sejun immediately turned his attention to the newly arrived poisonous bee. Out of curiosity, he asked who the bee actually was. At the same time, another bee appeared from behind Sejun and also started paying attention to the situation that was unfolding. However, the expression of the newly arrived bee suddenly turned serious. Apparently, it recognized the figure standing in front of Sejun. In a firm tone, the bee informed them that the unexpected guest was the poisonous queen bee from the eastern forest. Upon learning this, the bee immediately showed a hostile attitude. It made it clear that it would not hesitate to attack, because this territory was under their control. That harsh reaction even surprised the queen bee from the eastern forest. However, something completely unexpected happened instead. Instead of responding with anger or an attack, the poisonous queen bee from the eastern forest started to cry. In an instant, the queen was sobbing right in front of Sejun. That sight left Sejun truly confused. He couldn't understand why someone who was supposed to be a threat looked so fragile instead. With a panicked expression, Sejun tried to calm the situation. He assured her that everything would be all right and asked the queen to stop crying. However, the bee from Sejun's territory insisted that the place belonged to them and demanded that the queen bee from the eastern forest leave immediately. As Sejun tried to calm both sides, a loud buzzing sound approached. The sound came from the air and immediately drew everyone's attention. Papa Rabbit and the bear cub who were there also instinctively looked ahead in surprise. Soon after, the source of the sound became clear. A swarm of bees from the eastern forest was flying toward their location in large numbers. Seeing this sight, Sejun became even more shocked and confused. The situation that previously only involved 2 queen bees had now developed into something much more serious. One of the bees from the eastern forest then stepped forward and, in an angry tone, demanded to know who had passed judgment on their queen. The bee also emphasized that they would not hesitate to sacrifice their lives to protect their queen. Those words immediately made Sejun panic. He realized that the situation was heading in a very bad direction. In the midst of that tension, the queen bee from Sejun's territory quickly flew toward him. Unable to hide the anxiety, the queen asked what had actually happened. Sejun then explained that earlier, the queen of the poisonous bees from the eastern forest had come suddenly without any warning. Hearing that explanation, the queen bee immediately ordered her troops to prepare for battle. The bear cub, witnessing the development of the situation, looked surprised and wondered if they were really going to go to war right then. On the eastern forest side, the bee troops had already formed ranks and showed full readiness to fight. Meanwhile, in Sejun's territory, the bees also began to gather and take their positions, preparing for a battle they had never expected before. Seeing the 2 sides now facing each other, Sejun became even more panicked. He tried to stop the escalating situation and emphasized that they couldn't just start a war like that. But right at that moment, a very powerful surge of energy enveloped the area. The heavy and suffocating aura of a dragon was immediately felt, accompanied by a voice questioning why the place was so noisy. Hearing that voice, all the bees were instantly shocked. The courage they had shown before seemed to vanish in an instant, replaced by a nervousness that was hard to hide. Not long after, the figure with that aura became clearly visible. It turned out that the dragon was Kellion. As he landed heavily on the ground, Kellion looked around irritably and questioned the reason behind the commotion that was happening. His presence immediately made the atmosphere much more tense. Sejun looked surprised to see Kellion appear in that place. On the other hand, the bear cub was no less startled. He was puzzled and wondered why the white dragon was still there. Without showing the slightest hesitation, Kellion slowly opened his mouth. With the menacing aura radiating from his body, he declared that he would burn all the insects in that place using his dragon breath. The threat immediately made all the bees tremble in fear. In an instant, the atmosphere that was previously filled with the spirit of battle turned into panic. Seeing that, Sejun immediately stepped forward and stopped Kellion from acting. With an annoyed tone that was hard to hide, he emphasized that Kellion had already caused enough trouble by destroying his field before. Now, he even intended to hurt the bees that were under his protection. Immediately, Sejun once again conjured a dimensional magic circle right under Kellion's feet. The appearance of the magic circle instantly made the white dragon panic. In a hurry, Kellion tried to defend himself and explained that he had no idea what was really happening. He emphasized that he had no intention of attacking anyone, but only wanted to complain about the buzzing sound of the bees, which he found really irritating. However, even though Kellion had explained his reasons, Sejun still did not budge. The dimensional magic circle spinning beneath Kellion's feet continued to emit a pressure that made the dragon even more nervous. In the end, Kellion chose to give in and begged Sejun to stop the magic. The sight instantly left all the bees astonished. They looked at each other with confused expressions, not understanding how Sejun was able to make such a terrifying white dragon submit and hold back its anger. In their minds, Sejun clearly had something they didn't know about. With a firm attitude, Sejun then stated that as the Mayor of the Black Tower, he had the right to give orders to anyone within that territory. Placing both hands on his hips, Sejun shouted loudly for the bees and Kellion to stop arguing. He emphasized that from that moment on, they had to live in harmony and make peace with each other. A few moments later, under the scorching sunlight, the tense atmosphere slowly became calmer. The queen of the eastern forest bees was seen enjoying a glass of honey to quench her thirst. After taking a few sips, the queen's face slowly brightened again. Her spirit, which had faded for a moment, now seemed to rise again. Meanwhile, the bear cub looked at the bees enjoying the honey supply with a sad face. In his mind, the honey belonged to him. However, Sejun patiently asked him to share a little with the guests who were in need of help. According to Sejun, if they managed to make the bees their friends, then in the future they could actually get more honey than before. Hearing that explanation, the little bear's spirit was immediately reignited. Although the situation had calmed down, Sejun was still feeling curious. He wanted to know how the bees from the eastern forest could get to his farm. The queen bee from Sejun's area also had a question, the same question, considering that the area they visited was under their control. Finally, the queen bee of the eastern forest explained the reason for their arrival. In a gloomy tone, she revealed that their hive had been attacked by a red monster capable of breathing fire. Hearing this explanation, Sejun immediately began to think hard. He tried to recall what kind of monster had a red body and the ability to breathe fire. Not long after, another bee added that the monster also had a very hard shell, so their stings couldn't penetrate its defenses. As soon as he heard that description, Sejun immediately remembered something. Without saying much, he opened the storage room door and asked everyone to wait a moment. Sejun's actions made the bear cub even more curious about what he was thinking. Not long after, Sejun returned carrying the skeleton of a red fire ant monster. He then showed it to the bees and asked if that was the creature that had attacked their hive. The bees' reaction changed drastically. As soon as they saw the red fire ant skeleton, they were instantly filled with fear. Even the eastern forest queen bee was so shocked that she unconsciously dropped the glass of honey she was holding. The other bees immediately went on alert and ordered their troops to prepare for battle. Seeing the situation heating up again, Sejun quickly calmed them down. He asked the bees to stay calm and explained that the object he showed was just the skeleton of a dead fire ant monster. According to Sejun, the reason he kept the skeleton was because the monster had a scent that reminded him of a grasshopper, even though it was covered in an incredibly hard shell. He also explained that the fire ant monster had previously appeared in the southwestern forest area. However, now the fact that they have also attacked the eastern forest made him realize something worrying. The fire ant colony seemed to be growing much faster than he had ever anticipated. One of the bees then expressed his concern. According to him, there is a high possibility that the fire ants are still attacking their nest in the eastern forest right now. Those words were filled with frustration because they were unable to protect their own home. Hearing that anxiety, Sejun didn't hesitate at all. With full confidence, he declared that he would help them. Those words left the queen of the eastern forest bees stunned. With her eyes wide in surprise, she asked again to make sure if Sejun was really willing to help them in such a difficult situation. To answer her doubts, Sejun just showed a wide smile. He reminded her that from the beginning, he had always said how important it was to stay together and help each other. Hearing those words, the queen bee from Sejun's territory and the bear cub also smiled. Both of them welcomed Sejun's decision and agreed to the plan to help the bees from the eastern forest face the threat lurking around their hive. Meanwhile, the story shifts to Teo, who is traveling with LK and the Black Wolf. Sitting comfortably on LK's back, Teo kept chuckling and humming cheerfully, as if the journey was very enjoyable for him. During the journey, LK mentioned that the air on the 38th floor felt very fresh and calming. That statement made Teo turn with a surprised expression. With a loud voice, he immediately reminded that their purpose for coming to the 38th floor was not for sightseeing. They had a lot of goods that needed to be sold. There was even a special order from Park Sejun that had to be completed. However, Black Wolf actually found Teo quite strange. Just a moment ago, Teo himself looked so happy that he kept humming all the way. Not long after, their journey came to a halt when they saw a group of humans confronting the merchant cats. The atmosphere there seemed quite tense. A young man voiced a protest because they had previously been told there would be an auction. But in reality, the goods were simply given to whoever arrived first. According to him, if that rule had been explained from the start, he would have come earlier. On the other hand, Oren looked confused and nervous. He tried to explain that they actually didn't understand how to properly hold an auction. However, that explanation didn't help much. Another young man quickly urged the merchant cats to sell the scallion poison antidote, as many people were near death from it. The constant pressure made Oren tremble even more, and he just stopped. Oren was only able to ask them to be patient. Right at that moment, Theo's voice was heard calling Oren. Without wasting any time, Theo immediately asked what Oren was doing in that place. His presence immediately drew everyone's attention. The people there instantly showed their excitement and shouted that Theo had finally arrived. Hearing the commotion, Oren immediately turned around with a surprised look on his face. It was as if he couldn't believe that the person who appeared before him was really Theo, the representative. Not long after, another shout was heard, declaring that the real merchant cat had finally appeared. Some people even asked where Theo had been all this time. Hearing the welcome, Theo just smiled calmly and looked happy to know that so many people had really been waiting for his arrival. Meanwhile, the attention of some girls was actually drawn to the black wolf. They seemed charmed by his large size and thought of him as a giant dog. But the black wolf quickly corrected the misunderstanding, emphasizing that he was not a dog, but a true black wolf. On the other hand, another young man even hugged LK enthusiastically. Jokingly, he suggested to the black wolf, who was called Hegel, to just accept it if he was called a big dog. Not long after, Theo reached into his pocket and took something out. Calmly, he announced that since everyone had waited long enough, the auction would begin with 500 Manitoma cherries. The announcement was quickly followed by a young man requesting the auction start with the antidote for the green onion poison. Several others also pleaded anxiously. They explained that right now, many hunters had been poisoned and were in critical condition. Hearing that explanation, Theo fell silent for a moment. His face showed surprise before a calm smile finally returned. With a relaxed attitude, Theo stated that if that was really the situation, then he had another offer that was much more important. A moment later, hundreds of antidotes for the onion leaf poison appeared beside him. Theo announced that he would distribute 500 of those antidotes for free. Hearing the news, the crowd immediately moved in unison. They jostled and elbowed each other to be the first to get the antidote. That scene actually provoked Theo's anger. With a tone of surprise and annoyance, he questioned what they were really doing. Theo's reprimand made the entire crowd fall silent instantly. They looked surprised because they didn't expect Theo to stop them. Firmly, Theo explained that what they should do first was to take care of the victims who had been poisoned. After that, he allowed everyone to take 5 antidotes as needed. Those words made an old man with white hair chuckle. He commented that sometimes a cat actually has a better heart than a human. Those words surprised some people, because that old man was none other than Han Taijun, the leader of the Finnish group who was very well known among hunters. As soon as he recognized the figure, Theo smiled and said that it had been quite a while since they last met. Meanwhile, the people began to take the antidote they needed to save the wounded hunters. After things calmed down, Theo continued his conversation with Taijun. He asked about Dong Dongsik and wanted to know if everything was going well. Hearing that question, Taijun approached Theo while explaining that Dong Dongsik waited for his arrival every day. Unfortunately, Theo showed up on the day when Dong Dongsik was taking a break. On the other hand, Oren could only stand there, watching the whole event with a look of amazement that was hard to hide. For him, Theo's presence seemed like an instant solution that could resolve a huge mess in a very short time. At that moment, Taijun expressed his gratitude to Theo for sharing the antidote for the green onion poison freely with the hunters who needed it. However, Theo explained that there was one condition attached to the gift. These words made Taijun curious, and he immediately asked about the condition in question. According to Theo, some of the antidote he brought was a new type called sharp green onion. Just like the previous antidote, the plant would also be given for free. However, he asked Taijun and his group to plant as many of the sharp green onions as possible. Hearing that, Taijun looked surprised and asked again whether Theo really intended to hand over the valuable plant without asking for any reward. The young people around them also showed their enthusiasm. They had never seen a new type of green onion like that before. Moreover, they were getting it for free. Curiosity quickly filled the atmosphere. One of the young men then asked about the abilities or effects that the sharp green onion possessed. However, before explaining further, Theo first reminded them to be careful. The plant isn't meant to be eaten because it's so sharp in form and structure that it resembles a real sword. While observing the plant closely, Taijun asked again in a confused tone. He wanted to make sure whether Theo really wanted them to plant all of those sharp green onions and whether the request really came from Sejun. Without hesitation, Theo confirmed that all of it was indeed Sejun's instructions. Even so, Taejun still wasn't completely convinced. He asked again to make sure whether those sharp green onions would really be given for free. Hearing that question, Theo just reached into the bag he brought, while explaining that he still had many other amazing items. That answer immediately sparked the curiosity of the people around him. A young man quickly asked if Theo had brought any other interesting items this time. Even a girl approached him and expressed her gratitude for the generosity he had shown to all of them. However, Theo casually said something completely unexpected. According to him, if things continue like this, their world won't last long and will eventually head toward destruction. That simple sentence instantly made the atmosphere fall silent. Taejun, the girl, and the young people there immediately looked at Theo with confused and shocked expressions. They tried to digest the meaning of the words they had just heard. Not wanting to leave that curiosity hanging, Taejun immediately asked for a further explanation. He wanted to make sure whether their world was truly under the threat of destruction. That question made the other young people fall silent as well. Meanwhile, curiosity and anxiety slowly filled their faces. With his eyes wide open, Theo simply nodded his head and confirmed it. Strangely, he presented it as if it wasn't something to worry too much about. Meanwhile, the girl, the young men, and Taejun could only stand frozen in their places. The shock was so great that it left them speechless, unable to say a word. It was as if the atmosphere around them suddenly became much heavier than before. Suddenly, Taejun raised his voice and asked what Theo meant when he said that their world would soon be destroyed. Even he himself didn't really understand what Theo was talking about at that moment. On the other hand, Theo remembered a message that Sejun had once conveyed. At that time, Sejun asked him to listen carefully, because if that truth were to become widely known, it could cause a major panic. That memory made Theo fall silent for a moment. He carefully considered how much information he should reveal. With a calm demeanor, Theo finally explained that for now, he couldn't tell everything. However, as long as they followed what he said and continued to work hard, there was still a chance to prevent the coming destruction. Even so, one of the young men still looked confused after hearing the explanation. Not long after, a girl tried to ask for a few more hints, hoping Theo would be willing to share a small piece of information about the threat they were facing. But before Theo could give a further answer, Taejun immediately expressed his agreement. Without hesitation, he decided to trust Theo and was willing to do whatever was necessary according to his instructions. That decision made one of his group members ask for an explanation first. However, Taejun stood by his decision. In his opinion, they had all heard what Theo had said. Therefore, what needs to be done now is to continue selling the antidote for the scallion poison to secure funds, and then plant sharp scallions in all the farmland they own. Not only that, Taejun also emphasized that no one should spread rumors about the end of the world while the task is ongoing. He asked all his members to stop wasting time on useless things and start focusing on the work at hand. With a loud voice, Taejun made sure everyone understood his instructions. Without hesitation, his group members immediately stated that they understood and were ready to carry them out. Okay everyone, that's where the story stops for now. My deepest appreciation goes to all the creators behind this comic. If you're curious about the continuation of this story, you can read the comic directly on the website and support the comic at the same time. Usually, new chapters are released every 1 or 2 weeks, unless the comic is on hiatus. If this video content reaches 300,000 views, and the comic's story already has a sufficient ending, and also if my YouTube analytics support it, maybe I'll continue this series. In the meantime, I'll focus on adding other story collections to this YouTube channel to keep it healthy and have enough resources to keep going. If you like it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Write your opinions in the comments section. And remember, let's respect each other's differences in taste. Stay healthy, and see you in the next video.